At the second part of a four-part series is to how to get the most out of your internet leads, some best practices, things to share with you. We just recapped some stuff about process, making the appointment. Again, it's how many calls you make before you give up, what time of day we're making a phone call, what do you say when you get on the phone. Talked about mastering your response time, somewhere between an 11 and 30-minute average. And we looked at squeezing every last nickel out of your leads by doing a short-term and a long-term follow-up process, as well as talk about the numbers and the process techniques that we'll look at to measure and make sure that you're getting the most out of your leads. So let's get a little further into the program, and let's take a look at some deeper stuff. So when it looks at process, or we look at a process that you build for the store, we had to make something, first of all, that was congruent with the dealer, the customer, and the OEM. Something that made everybody happy, but more or less incorporated psychology, but realized that we put into this an ability for the dealership to make a fair profit, understanding the concepts of what the people are thinking and what they're doing. Most importantly, the objective is to get an email to get people to respond to you and return your phone call or to pick up the phone when you call. And then the telephone, we use that to get people to the showroom floor, so essentially you guys do what you do best. So the process had to work with all three. The second is to clearly know that emails don't sell cars. If we don't take the initiative to do further aspects of telephone work and a lot of phone calls into it, we won't win. So it has to be a combination of all the three that make it together. And the objective, again, of the process is to get customers to like you, trust you, and but more importantly is to leave them wanting more, to bridge the gap so that they communicate with you a little bit further from a process standpoint. We talked about the telephone. Once again, remember that it takes at least 9 attempts to get a customer on the phone. Caller ID, voicemail, call screening. So when you look at that type of a process, you want to ask yourself and ask the people, are you setting a reasonable expectation for your staff to make the number of phone calls necessary to schedule those appointments? So in other words, if we're giving 100 leads to an internet sales manager and we expect them to sell 20 cars, which is 20% of those, you are talking about actually making a total of 900 phone calls just to talk to every one of those customers one time. So is that a reasonable expectation based on the activities that we say today? To reach that many customers, every single day they come to work, they would need to make at least 45 outbound phone calls to make that happen. Are we doing that, setting the stage, or are those reasonable expectations, knowing that on a Saturday or Sunday we might be delivering 2 or 3 or 4 cars and not be able to make any phone calls? Those calls would have to be made up the following day, etc. Second, again, is measure the time of day. The greatest likelihood that you would have an opportunity to catch a customer in a relaxed atmosphere is when you would most likely find a customer in your showroom floor. Again, most people have busy work schedules during the day, so we're trying to reach them to set up appointments, and it has a low percentage of opportunities as opposed to the calls that are made in the evening or calls that are made on the weekends. So there's a definite structure and a definite problem that we have in most dealerships because our salespeople are face-to-face at the times they would have the highest yield. So the appointment setters are certainly ways to get around that. And the third part is really focus on the script so that we stay off of price and availability. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my industry, I've been in the car business since 1976, is to teach a salesman how to stay off of the price and availability objection while still winning on the relationship. And so we're going to share some of those techniques in a minute. And the real key to making the appointment is about listening. It's about asking the most appropriate questions that can build a relationship and more articulate the customer's needs that will help build that relationship for them. So that's a big key. We look forward to building some of this process here. And again, when you talk about mastering response time, the average response time today for people is approximately 5.4 hours. There was one dealership I went to in St. Louis, Missouri. They had about 275 leads a month. They had 2 guys handling those leads, a GM, and everybody thought they were doing a good job. Their average response time was 1,044 hours. That was equivalent to about 44 days. So they were cherry-picking the leads. They thought that they would have the highest grosses. They were ignoring the rest of them. And, of course, as you could tell, the results were very fragmented on their closing ratios and their percentages. It's not uncommon to look at response rates at 5 or 4 hours, but we want to think in terms of saying, if whoever's watching the electronic lot should be also thinking about watching the regular lot, because it's the same customer. You wouldn't let a customer out there on the showroom floor kicking your tires without being greeted in a short period of time. We know what the results are going to be. It's very similar to the electronic lot. So today, many customers are choosing to come in the electronic lot as opposed to the first one. We know that that's a big, critical, key factor in turning that success rate around. But the speed of the response will be equal to the relationship. It will also be equal to the gross profit. And the oxymoron about this whole thing is if we tell you the average response time, 5.4 hours, a direct correlation to the closing ratios, but it doesn't seem that if the average time frame of a buyer is 90 days into this process, why is it so important to respond to them? It just is. The statistics are very clear, and so does it articulate into the closing ratios of what takes place on the other side. Your goal should be 10 to 30 minutes. The best in class, those are the best dealerships that perform that way. It's not that if you're an internet salesman that you have to do it, but that it has to be done. So we want to address those concerns, and those are some of the things that we work with when we get to the dealership to establish that kind of a solution and that kind of a turnaround. When it comes to squeezing every last dime, remember that because the new car buyers take longer, up to 90 days, a used car lead is significantly faster in the closing ratio. We will talk about that in a few minutes. But used car buyers do take their time. Comprehensive follow-up process for the first 45 days. So if you could map out a series of emails that said, did you get it? If you mapped out emails that said, here's some testimonials of previous customers, another email said, here's a testimonial, an email from a general manager or sales manager, internet director saying, did my guys follow up with you appropriately? Did you have any questions? Do you have any concerns fitting this car in your budget? All a series of emails that could be triggered to elicit some form of response. Now, we don't expect the salespeople to remember and have triggers for them to do that. If you can automate those emails, they work as assistants for you in your CRM to sort of help you accomplish that. And if you guys need help with some of these emails, reach out to us. There's some ways that we can perhaps help you with some of these email templates and designs. So the weekly emails that we go beyond that level is to never stay out of sight, out of mind. Remember that we're big fans of sending people out some form of a recipe and special of the week, a used car, maybe even a service special to gain the most mileage out of it, but something in terms of sending just to your prospects, your internet prospects that haven't pulled the trigger or haven't completed their purchase cycle. Again, if they're looking for a vehicle, they're not going to be, when they have time, they're going to look at these emails. If they don't have time, they'll just hit the delete key, which is okay, but you are never out of sight, out of mind if you're sending those on a weekly basis. And it's not uncommon to have 2 years go by and people thank you, saying thank you for following up because nobody else did, and you accomplished that purchase. Let's take a deeper look at some of the lead equity. Most of the questions we get when we go around the country, depending on the type of structure you have, is what's the right number of internet leads that you would give an internet manager. So let's work under the premise that you have an internet manager that handles leads from start to finish. They go through that process. What's the magic number? I've heard 100, I've heard 200, I've heard 75. It's a trick question, and what we generally do at the dealership is we realize that almost every dealership that we walk into in the United States, you can count the number of salespeople that work there, multiply that number times 10, and that's how many cars they sell. So based on that mathematics, there are some people at a dealership we know that sell 10 cars a month. Some people sell 20, and some only sell 6 or 7. And it's just the general nature of what we do. So we help determine, based on the person's ability, how many cars have they sold last month, how many cars will they sell this month, what's their goal, what are they capable of, and we divide that by 0.2 and distribute the number of leads that's commensurate with their ability to sell. So a 10-car salesman would only get 50 leads. A 20-car salesman would get 100 leads. A 40-car salesman, if there are some, and there are some out there that can do it, probably should get as many as 200 leads, because each one of those has to require a certain amount of attention and a certain amount of effort to convert that to a sales process. So I think you'll find that it's pretty interesting when you take the mathematics and never give somebody more than they're able to handle at one time with the phone calls, the delivery process, et cetera, into the store. Now, of course, if you're running a BDC or CDC, you can have more leads handled because they don't physically get involved in completing the sales process based on the hours they work, and we recommend, the heavy phone hours, evenings, late afternoons, Saturdays, and Sundays. You'll have greater success with that, and they can handle probably a greater number of leads, providing that we're measuring the number of phone calls that they do perform. And of course, on the all sales routine, where someone's distributing leads to the salespeople, the biggest key crunch on that is, are they making the calls, and are they making the calls at the right time of day? Are we setting up reasonable expectations and measuring the performances as part of that as well? From a process standpoint, we encourage you to do this, and this will help you analyze if things are on track or not on track, but spot check your CRM. Go back to a lead that you had 10 days ago today. For those that are GMs and managers on this webinar, if you say arbitrarily whatever day I decide to check it, let me look exactly 10 days ago today and see how many people responded to those leads, how many people capitalized with them, what would the efforts that I see in the CRM have earned my business, how many phone calls did we make in the first 10 days to try to get that person on the phone call, what time of day were those calls made. It'll become clear and concise to us at whatever day that you decide to check that. A 10-day-old email would give you the evidence to say, yes, that we did everything we could, or there's more that we could have incorporated into that to make it a better performance. We want to look at dead deals. Sometimes the determination for dead deals is the guy didn't call me back in 4 phone calls, or it's been 3 weeks and I haven't heard from him, or this guy obviously just wants my price because he's going to go to the dealership that's closer to him. And the answer to that is no. It's a dead deal was not a dead deal until someone clearly says, stop emailing me, or listen, I didn't buy a Honda, but I bought a Toyota, and I no longer need your services anymore. Then we move on from that standpoint. And then look at a 90-day-old prospect. Just go back into the CRM, whatever day that you decide to do this, and say 90 days ago, let me pull up some prospects and say, what did we do? If this was the guy that had the F-150 and needed to convince his wife to do that and had to buy bedroom furniture and paint the fence and clean the garage before he could complete that purchase, are we still staying in front of him with the branding of our product and our message, or are we long gone and forgotten so that he'll come into the dealership as a regular up when he decides to complete that purchase? You'll know clearly by spot checking the CRM. When we look at the phone, I think, again, it's very important to make sure that we keep the edge. We certainly want to make sure that we're doing the best job by asking them to role play or listen in on the calls that they're doing on a spot check, and making sure that, most importantly, that the frequency of calls that we're doing is consistent and the frequency of calls is articulate across the board. We want to make sure that that does happen along the way. And then last but not least is we want to manage to a 20%. So just manage the people's performance against their ability to sell. We know in the dealership what that person sold last month, the month before, the month before. We know we can gauge goals. If you have automated emails, they can actually turn a 10-car salesman into a 13 or a 14 and even more over a period of time, because they work for them as opposed to forcing them to do more work on their end. But certainly making sure that we set the stage to say, I'm not going to give a salesman 200 leads who's going to sell 10 cars on an average and expect them to sell any more than 10 cars. If I do, I'm kidding myself, because at the end of the day, when you say, how come you only sell 10 cars, the answer is consistent. Well, the leads suck, or the guys didn't call me back, and that's generally not the truth. The truth is all of those people need a great deal of phone calls, they need efforts, and they need to be massaged even harder, because you've got to get them into the showroom floor before we can complete that purchase. So let's take a look at the prospect's perspective. We know it's important to think about what the people are doing and what their thought process is when they're sending a lead. Customers don't know what they don't know, and it's ironic that we look at some of these statistics, and I think you're going to see a most distinct opportunity for us to turn these sales around another way. So we're going to dive into this in section 3. So we'll just hold on to this part, and the section 3 will be here for you in just a few minutes.